Half of all the world's AI data centers have quietly been canceled. That's the story going around right now on channels with millions of subscribers. So I went and checked it against the actual sources. It isn't true, but what's really happening is stranger, and it's already changing what you pay for power. Because when a tech company walks away from a data center, the tech company is fine, but the wires, the substations, the transformers, somebody already started paying for those, and that somebody might be you. So I'm doing two things. First, I'm killing the viral claim with receipts. Then I'm showing you the mechanism nobody in my feed is talking about. The one where 30 gigawatts of data centers asked one utility for power and under 6 gigawatts were willing to sign for it. The claim traces back to one report from a research firm called Sightline Climate, published in February. They looked at about 140 projects, roughly 16 gigawatts, all scheduled to come online in 2026. Of that 16, only about 5 gigawatts is actually under construction. The rest is still just an announcement. And here's what they actually concluded. 30 to 50% of that one slice may not materialize. May not. It's a projection, not a body count. It's global, not American. And it's 1 year's worth of completions. Not every AI data center on Earth. Somewhere between that sentence and my feed may not materialize turned into have been canceled. That's not a summary. That's a different claim, wherein the first one's close. And it's contested. The analysis shop, Semi-Analysis, published a piece literally titled, "Stop Saying Half of 2026 US Data Center Capacity is Canceled." Their argument is that the number lumps speculative announcements nobody ever financed in, with real projects that hit real delays. Their own hyperscaler forecast moved about 1% in 6 months. There's a second stat flying around too. Goldman Sachs supposedly found 7.7 gigawatts actually online versus 10 gigawatts of NVIDIA chips shipped. I went looking for it. I couldn't find it in anything Goldman published, and none of the videos citing it link a source. I'm not going to repeat a number I can't stand behind, and neither should they. Because here's the spending, which isn't hard to look up. For 2026, Microsoft guided to roughly $190 billion. Amazon, about $200 billion. Google, up to $190. Meta, up to $145. Together, that's around $725 billion, up 77% from last year. That's not what a collapse looks like. Microsoft's finance chief, Amy Hood, told investors they expect to remain constrained at least through 2026. Goldman's base case has data center occupancy peaking around 93% next year. They can't get enough. So what about the cancellations that are real? Bloomberg reported in March that Oracle and OpenAI dropped a planned 600 megawatt expansion in Abilene, Texas. But read it closely. The existing 1.2 gigawatt site is still getting built. What died was the expansion on top of it, over financing, a cooling failure, and OpenAI wanting next-generation chips in new buildings. Meta is reportedly in talks to take that free capacity. It didn't evaporate, it changed hands. Same story with the others. T.D. Cowen said Microsoft walked away from a couple hundred megawatts, then maybe 2 gigawatts. Microsoft disputed the framing and kept spending. Amazon paused some early-stage talks, mostly outside the US, and called it routine capacity management. These are analyst notes the companies argue with, not confessions. So the honest version is boring and important. This is a bottleneck, not a bust. Transformers run lead times north of a year. Grid connection queues take years. There's more than 2 terawatts of generation and storage waiting in American interconnection queues right now. And historically, about 3/4 of everything that enters those queues never gets built. It just gets withdrawn. Hold on to that. Because that's where this stops being a tech story and starts being your story. To serve a data center, your utility has to build. New lines, new substations, new capacity, and utilities don't build for free. Here's the machine, and it's not a conspiracy, it's just how regulated utilities work. Everything they build goes into something called the rate base, and regulators let them collect operating costs plus an allowed return on that base, currently around 9.7%. That's not guaranteed profit, it's an allowed opportunity to earn. But the bigger the thing they build, the bigger the base they earn on. Nobody has to be a villain for that to point one direction, which raises the only question that matters. What if the demand they're building for was never real? It has a name, phantom load. A developer shops the same data center to 5 utilities at once, and all 5 write it into their forecast as if it's coming to them. Peter Fried, who used to run energy strategy at Meta, and Allison Clements, a former federal energy regulator, wrote that one project can show up as several separate requests, and the result is a significant amount of phantom load. This isn't a fringe theory. In June, Federal regulators at FERC open orders aimed squarely at it, with the commissioners saying they're adding escalating readiness requirements to deter duplicative or speculative requests. And in Virginia, Dominion's large load queue hit about 70 gigawatts against an all-time system peak of under 25, nearly 3 times everything they've ever delivered at once. So Ohio ran the experiment. In July of 2025, regulators approved a data center tariff for AEP Ohio. If you want more than 25 megawatts, you now pay a minimum bill on up to 85% of the capacity you reserved, whether you use it or not, across a 4-year ramp plus an 8-year minimum term, with an exit fee if you walk. Put your money where your gigawatts are. So watch the pipeline sort itself out. More than 30,000 megawatts of data centers came asking AEP Ohio for power. 13,000 cared enough to request an engineering study, and when it came time to actually sign, with a minimum bill attached, 5,642 megawatts. Under 1 in 5 of what walked in the door. And here's the part that should bother you. The number AEP reports to the grid operator as its forecast isn't the 5.6 that signed. It's the 13 that asked for a study. Ohio's own manufacturers are in a fight with them right now, arguing the forecast is still inflated by at least 3.3 gigawatts. Your grid gets planned around the bigger number. This already has a body. AEP subsidiaries in Indiana, West Virginia, and Kentucky bought around 750 megawatts of capacity for data centers that never showed up. To be fair, they're trying to resell it, and they might succeed, but somebody bought power for customers who were never coming. Now look at what's happening in the biggest grid market in America. PJM runs an auction that buys capacity for 67 million people. The cost of that auction went from $2.2 billion to $14.7 billion to $16.1 to $16.4. And in the latest one, of roughly 5,250 megawatts of load growth, about 5,100 is data centers. When prices first spiked, PJM pointed at power plants retiring. It doesn't talk like that anymore. Now PJM says data center demand keeps outstripping new supply, and its own independent market monitor calls data center load growth the primary reason for these prices. Okay, now I owe you the other side because I'd rather be right than go viral, and the other side is genuinely strong. States aren't asleep. 24 of them have approved a large load tariff, and regulators greenlit 29 of them in 2025 alone, versus 14 in the previous 6 years combined. Virginia now makes big customers post $1.5 million per megawatt in collateral. A 250 megawatt campus posts $375 million before it plugs in. And there's a real argument that big customers help you. EPRI found data center growth was associated with about 6% lower average retail rates between 2019 and 2024 because a giant customer spreads the fixed cost of the grid across more kilowatt hours. If they show up and pay, everybody's bill gets a little easier. Because EPRI put the caveat right there in their own finding. That effect reverses if the promised load doesn't materialize. The rebuttal has my whole argument buried inside it. So here's where I actually land, and it isn't in any of the videos I watched. The guardrails are real. They're also late, and they're short. They went up in 25 and 26 after the spending had already started. They lock in contracts for 8 to 15 years. But the steel and copper they're protecting sits in the rate base earning for 30 to 40. That gap is where you live, and you don't have to take my word for it. Joseph Pereira, Deputy Director of Colorado's Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate, whose entire job is watching this for regular customers, put it like this. It's impossible to fully segregate out all the costs. There's always some risk, and we've run this movie before. In the 80s, a public power group in the Northwest canceled most of a nuclear build, defaulted on $2.25 billion in bonds, and became the biggest municipal default in American history at the time. By some estimates, Northwest ratepayers are still paying that off into the 2040s. Decades, for plants that were never finished. That's the thing about canceled infrastructure. It doesn't disappear, it just gets amortized, quietly, onto somebody. A data center can be canceled with an email. The substation built to feed it can't. Nobody cancels the grid. So the question isn't whether the AI bubble is popping, because on the evidence, the build-out is accelerating, not dying. The question is, who's holding the paper when a forecast turns out to be fiction? And I'll be honest with you about the one thing I can't tell you yet. No canceled data center has gone through a full test case. Nobody's proven ratepayers ate one. Not yet. Which is exactly when you can still do something about it. So go look up whether your state has a large load tariff and what it actually requires. That one search tells you more about your next 10 years of power bills than any AI headline will. Subscribe if you want the follow-up, because I'm digging into who's really paying for the Transformers next.